In 1956, Britain learned that controlling territory no longer guaranteed power. What mattered was alliance trust. Greenland looks like a strategic asset on a map. But in today's economy, power is priced through markets, not territory. If Greenland became contested, the real cost for the United States would not be Arctic ice. It would be Europe's defense market. Welcome to Geo Capitalist. Today's analysis examines Denmark, Greenland, and Europe's defense market, and what changes for the United States when sovereignty pressure collides with alliance economics. This is a data-driven breakdown of defense spending, procurement trust, and long-term market power. Subscribe for geopolitical analysis focused on how money, industry, and influence actually move beneath the headlines. Before measuring what the United States could lose, it is essential to understand what it already has. Through long-standing agreements with Denmark, the United States maintains reliable, low-friction access to Greenland that delivers strategic and economic value without the costs of ownership. This access is embedded inside alliance structures, legal clarity, and local governance frameworks that make American operations predictable and politically sustainable. From a defense economics perspective, this arrangement is unusually efficient. U.S. presence in Greenland benefits from Denmark's diplomatic credibility in Europe, its integration into EU regulatory culture, and its role as a trusted NATO ally. That trust reduces risk premiums. It simplifies contracting. It lowers insurance costs, legal exposure, and reputational friction for both government and private partners. In other words, Denmark quietly absorbs political risk that would otherwise fall directly on Washington. This is the overlooked baseline. The United States does not operate in Greenland as an outsider negotiating ad hoc access. It operates as a partner inside a stable system where permissions, infrastructure use, and coordination are normalized. Any move that disrupted Denmark's role as sovereign guarantor would not start from zero. It would dismantle an already favorable economic structure. What looks like a gain in control would economically mean surrendering one of the lowest-cost strategic arrangements the United States currently enjoys in the Arctic. Greenland's strategic relevance does not flow directly to Washington. It flows through Copenhagen. That distinction is central to understanding the economic risk. Denmark is not a passive intermediary. It is the legal, diplomatic, and economic gatekeeper that embeds Greenland inside Europe's institutional system. Every defense arrangement, infrastructure agreement, and long-term investment framework touching Greenland is filtered through Denmark's sovereignty and its standing within European and transatlantic markets. This position gives Denmark quiet leverage. Not leverage expressed through threats, but through norms, procedures, and credibility. Denmark's governance reassures European partners that Arctic access remains lawful, predictable, and aligned with alliance values. That reassurance lowers political risk for anyone cooperating with U.S. forces or firms in Greenland. It also anchors Greenland-related activity inside Europe's broader defense industrial ecosystem, where trust determines who is welcomed as a partner and who is treated as a risk. If Denmark's role were undermined, that stabilizing effect would disappear. Greenland would not simply become more American, it would become more contested. European institutions would respond defensively, recalibrating procurement rules, partnership assumptions, and long-term planning to reduce exposure to uncertainty. Economically, this matters because defense markets punish instability. Denmark's value to the United States is not symbolic, it is functional. It keeps Greenland embedded in a system that makes American presence cheaper, quieter, and more acceptable across Europe. When states invoke security, there is often a quieter economic logic underneath. History offers a consistent pattern. In Venezuela, years of U.S. pressure, sanctions, and diplomatic intervention have been inseparable from one fact. Venezuela holds some of the world's largest proven oil reserves. The recent U.S. operation in Venezuela, including strikes and the capture of its president, was widely interpreted, including by analysts, as being driven by access to oil resources that have long been central to American energy interests and refinery integration. Public narratives emphasized governance and stability, but analysts widely noted that energy security, refinery compatibility, and long-term supply access were always part of the strategic calculus. The lesson is not about morality, it is about incentives. Greenland follows a similar logic, though with different resources. Beneath the ice lie rare earth elements, nickel, copper, and other critical minerals essential for defense systems, electronics, and energy transition technologies. Assessments referenced by institutions such as the United States Geological Survey and European bodies have long highlighted Greenland's potential as a future resource frontier. As global competition over supply chains intensifies, these materials acquire strategic value far beyond their current production levels. Psychologically, this matters. When a great power frames pressure as security-driven, markets and allies often recognize the resource dimension regardless of official language. That recognition shapes reactions. In Europe, where resource access is managed through law and partnership, any perception that economic objectives are being pursued through coercive means triggers defensive recalibration. The result is not confrontation, but caution, and caution is costly for the actor that introduces it. If the United States attempted to annex Greenland, the immediate military balance in Europe would not collapse, but the defense economic balance would begin to shift. European defense markets are not governed only by performance and price. They are governed by trust, political alignment, and long-term reliability of suppliers. An annexation involving Denmark, a NATO ally, would introduce a fundamental uncertainty into that equation. Inside NATO, procurement decisions are formally national but politically interconnected. Once trust is strained, European governments quietly adjust their assumptions. U.S. systems would still be purchased where no alternatives exist or where contracts are already locked in. But future programs, the ones that define defense markets for decades, would be reassessed. Conditionality would increase. European co-production requirements would harden. Sensitive systems involving data, command and control, and software would face greater scrutiny. At the European Union level, this recalibration would accelerate existing efforts toward defense industrial autonomy. Programs designed to strengthen Europe's own industrial base would gain political momentum, justified not as anti-American, but as risk management. Over time, this translates into fewer automatic wins for U.S. firms, shorter contract horizons, and a gradual erosion of market share in Europe's most profitable defense segments. The loss would not be sudden, it would be structural, and difficult to reverse once embedded. If the United States destabilized alliance trust through a Greenland annexation, China and Russia would not need to gain territory to benefit. They would gain something more valuable: strategic narrative leverage. Both could argue, credibly in the global South, that Western rules apply selectively. That weakens U.S. diplomatic positioning in trade, sanctions enforcement, and technology alliances. For China, this reinforces its message that security and economics should be decoupled from U.S.-led systems. For Russia, it validates long-standing claims about NATO inconsistency, even if Europe remains firmly opposed to Moscow on security grounds. Europe, meanwhile, is fully capable of expanding its own defense industrial capacity. The constraint has never been technical ability, but political urgency. A Greenland shock would increase that urgency. European governments would find it easier to justify spending domestically rather than defaulting to American suppliers. The primary beneficiaries would be European firms already positioned at the high end of defense production. Airbus would gain in air power, ISR, and space systems. Rheinmetall would benefit across land systems and ammunition. Thales and Leonardo would gain in sensors, electronics, cyber, and command systems. BA Systems, despite close U.S. ties, would also benefit from Europe-first procurement logic. The outcome is not Europe abandoning America. It is Europe internalizing more of its defense economy, and that shift quietly rewards both European industry and America's global competitors. The most misunderstood outcome of a Greenland annexation scenario is the idea of rupture. Europe would not sever defense ties with the United States. It would reprice them. In defense economics, repricing matters more than rhetoric. Once political risk enters the equation, relationships shift from default alignment to negotiated dependence. For decades, U.S. defense firms benefited from a structural advantage in Europe: trust embedded in alliance leadership. That trust translated into streamlined approvals, political cover for large purchases, and long-term sustainment contracts that locked in market share. If that trust were weakened by an annexation involving Denmark, European governments would not cancel existing systems en masse. Instead, they would change the rules governing future ones. New programs would increasingly require European ownership, European intellectual property, and European control over data and software layers. U.S. firms would still be welcome, but as partners, not anchors. This distinction is critical. Anchors shape ecosystems. Partners participate in them. Inside NATO, interoperability would remain a necessity, but interoperability no longer guarantees procurement preference. Europe would aim to ensure that no single external supplier could exert leverage over its long-term defense posture. Economically, that means fewer automatic renewals, more competitive tenders, and a gradual but lasting dilution of American dominance in Europe's defense market. The deepest cost to the United States would not appear in annual sales figures. It would emerge over procurement cycles measured in decades. European defense markets are built around long-term programs: fighters, armored vehicles, missile defense, command systems, and sustainment ecosystems that last 30 to 40 years. Once a supplier is displaced at the program design stage, it rarely returns. A Greenland annexation scenario would inject political risk precisely at that stage. European governments would begin designing future systems with an explicit goal of minimizing exposure to U.S. political leverage. This would reshape requirements, favoring modular architectures, European software sovereignty, and supply chains anchored inside Europe. American firms would still compete, but from a weaker position, often forced into co-production or secondary roles. This matters because the highest profits in defense do not come from initial sales. They come from upgrades, maintenance, training, and digital integration over decades. Losing the role of system integrator means losing the economic core of the program. Over time, this would reduce American defense firms' pricing power, scale advantages, and influence over NATO standards evolution. The result is a slow erosion of dominance. Not a boycott, not a backlash, but a recalibration that quietly transfers value from U.S. firms to European industry, contract by contract, program by program. At its core, a Greenland annexation would represent a trade-off between symbolic control and systemic influence. The United States would be exchanging a cooperative, low-cost Arctic position for a higher-cost, higher-friction one, and paying for it through diminished economic leverage in Europe's defense market. Denmark's role in Greenland currently anchors U.S. presence inside a trusted European framework. That framework keeps markets open, procurement-friendly, and alliance politics aligned. Removing or undermining it would not isolate Europe from America, but it would push Europe to accelerate independence where it matters most economically. China and Russia would benefit indirectly, not because Europe turns toward them, but because transatlantic cohesion weakens at the margins. European industry would benefit directly, gaining political cover to internalize defense production that has long been technically feasible but politically delayed. For the United States, the lesson is structural. In modern geopolitics, power is amplified through systems, not seized through maps. Greenland's true value lies in access, legitimacy, and alliance cohesion. Losing those in exchange for ownership would impose costs far beyond the Arctic, costs paid in lost contracts, diminished influence, and a defense market that no longer defaults to America. History shows that great powers rarely lose influence because they lack strength. They lose influence when they misjudge how systems react to pressure. One of the clearest parallels is the Suez Crisis. Britain and France believed territorial control and military capability were enough to preserve strategic relevance. Instead, they discovered that acting without alliance legitimacy accelerated their decline as global economic powers. The lesson was not about weakness. It was about misreading the post-war system. A more recent example is the Iraq conflict. The United States achieved rapid military success, but paid a longer-term price in alliance trust, market access, and diplomatic leverage, especially in Europe. What is unfolding around Greenland fits this historical logic. The Arctic is not a 19th century frontier. It is a networked system where legitimacy determines cost. History suggests that when power ignores that reality, it does not collapse, but it becomes more expensive to sustain. And there you have it. If you found this breakdown valuable, watch our next video. It connects directly to what's unfolding. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us decode these global shifts without compromise. This was Denmark, Greenland, and Europe's defense market, and what changes for America when sovereignty pressure collides with alliance economics. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.